advantage
Call
of this.
Fletcher Tabuteau.
Chair, thank you for this opportunity to stand up on behalf of New Zealand First in relation to this taxation legislation. I just wanted to touch on a few things that coincidentally have already been raised and just reaffirm some of the words that have been spoken already in the House. This is a highly complex piece of legislation, and the number of, or bill, and the number of pieces of legislation that are being altered are significant and quite varied. And it's important that we get this opportunity to come back and touch on each and every one of them. But I first of all wanted to add New Zealand's First voice on the charity discussion. So the intent there is to ensure that a student is recognised as still being domiciled in New Zealand for the purposes of repayments in terms of their student loan. So we acknowledge that this is the right and fair thing to do. But in reference to new section 27A, the Commissioner must keep a list of entities that are charities for the purposes of section 25(1)(b). The list must specify, and I won't go and read that all out because I think there seems to be consensus already that the specificity is quite detailed. In fact, there should be greater debate and perhaps a question for the Minister here about the level of obligations for charities in terms of declaring of information, because I would suggest that we may have gone too far in terms of the charities' obligations. Also, Sir, 27E. Are there currently entities... a question to the Minister. 27E, it's quite specific. So it says charities listed under the Act, listed as a charity, do not meet the criteria set out in 27B. So the question is, are there entities listed under this charities component of the legislation which don't actually meet the current criteria? And if that's the case, then does the Commissioner have an arbitrary right now to kind of delist them from that charities list? It's a fair question, a reasonable question, and something that we would like clarity on. But then if you actually move on to new section 176A, the level of disclosure goes quite far. And what the question is in 176A is questions around the charity being able to contest the decision of the Commissioner around the charity listing in the legislation. It says, they can contest if they believe it is not fair and reasonable. So my question to the Minister is, in the section 27B, it sets out a very clear and straightforward list of the definitions in terms of requirements for defining what a charity is. So what is the opportunity there for them to say what's not fair and reasonable about it? It's legislative. It's a tick the box. There's no debate involved in it. They're either a charity under the Act or they're not. So it's just a matter of confusing the issue there, Mr. Chairman. On the matter of, if I could take the committee's attention to 209A Part 1 and the disclosure of information to the Australian Taxation Office in relation to borrowers who are or may be overseas based. So New Zealand First looked at this part of the legislation and said, actually, that's quite reasonable. We're very clear on our expectation for New Zealanders in terms of paying back their debt and their obligations in terms of borrowed money. And when we looked at the legislation, we said, well, it makes sense that New Zealanders overseas should be required to do the same thing. And so we ran up to the issue, into the issue about information sharing. And the solution was to obtain or verify contact details of borrowers who are or may be overseas based, administer the student loan scheme in relation to those borrowers. For these purposes, the Commissioner may provide the information set out. Now, again, the level of detail there is quite high. But, Sir, I just want to take this opportunity to contrast, because we have current issues in front of the House at the moment where we look at the clear ability for two governments to come together talk very clearly with one another on information sharing, data sharing, contacting individuals.
Grant Roberts.